There is a number that does not exist in over 80% of the world's tallest buildings. Not a missing number on a sign. A missing number on the actual elevator panel. Press the button for floor 14 in most skyscrapers in New York, Hong Kong, Shanghai, or Dubai, and you will arrive at a floor that is, by every honest measure of physics and construction, the 13th floor of the building. The number 13 was never built. It was simply skipped. In steel and concrete, in cities that spent billions of dollars proving they do not believe in superstition. That is the first strange thing about the small metal panel you have touched 10,000 times in your life and never once questioned. Before I show you the rest, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. I want to see how far this goes. Here is the real mystery. Nobody made elevator buttons look the same everywhere. There is no international law. No single company that built every elevator on Earth. No treaty signed in Geneva that says the up arrow goes on top and the down arrow goes underneath it. And yet, in Tokyo and in Toronto and in Cape Town and in Santiago, you can walk into a building you have never seen before, in a country where you do not speak the language, and you will know exactly which button to press within about 1 second. That should not be possible. And the reason it is possible is stranger than a rule. It is what happens when thousands of engineers in different countries, in different decades, working with no coordination at all, keep running into the exact same problem. And the problem is not technical. The problem is you. Specifically, the problem is your body, your eyes, your fear, and the 4 seconds you have to make a decision before the doors close. Let's start with the first thing every elevator designer in history has had to solve, whether they worked in 1920s Chicago or last year in Shenzhen. A button panel has to work for a 6-year-old child reaching up, an adult reaching down without bending over, and a person in a wheelchair reaching across, all using the exact same row of buttons. 3 completely different bodies. 1 panel. Engineers in different countries did not meet to agree on a solution. They each ran their own version of the same experiment, with real people in real buildings for decades. And they kept landing in the same narrow band, somewhere between roughly 35 and 48 inches off the floor, depending on the country's specific accessibility code. Not because a single body decided the number, because that is the only zone where 3 incompatible bodies all happen to overlap. Go higher, and the wheelchair user cannot reach it. Go lower, and the standing adult has to stoop. The button height is not a decision, it is a compromise, discovered independently, over and over, by people who had never spoken to each other. Now, here is where it gets genuinely strange. The door open and door close icons. 2 abstract shapes. 2 vertical lines with arrows pointing toward each other, and 2 vertical lines with arrows pointing away. No words. No language. And somehow, whether you are in Seoul or Sao Paulo, you know instantly which one opens the door and which one closes it, even if you have never seen those exact icons before in your life. That icon was not invented once and copied by everyone else. It was independently arrived at by multiple elevator manufacturers in different countries because every other version they tried failed. Engineers tested icons that looked like actual doors. They tested text in multiple languages stacked on top of each other. They tested colored dots. All of it failed the same test, which is the only test that actually matters in an elevator. Can a person understand this in under 1 second, while distracted, while anxious, while their attention is split between holding a bag, watching a closing door, and glancing at their phone? The 2 arrow icon survived because it is one of the only shapes the human brain decodes without reading it. It works on a part of your visual system, older than language. And because every manufacturer kept independently discovering this same fact through their own trial and error, the icon converged on its own, the same way water finds the same path down a mountain from 1,000 different starting points. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. None of this is about convenience. It is about what happens when the system fails. Every elevator panel in the world is secretly designed around the worst 4 seconds of a person's day. Not the average ride, the fire, the power outage, the moment the lights cut and the cab stops between floors and a stranger standing next to you starts breathing too fast. That is the actual design brief, even though nobody says it out loud. Braille on the buttons exists for the moment. Someone cannot see the panel because the smoke has filled the cab. The audio chime exists for the moment. Someone cannot read the floor number because they have already started to panic. The buttons are large, raised, and spaced apart, not because anyone enjoys big buttons, but because trembling hands miss small targets. And elevator engineers have known this since long before anyone wrote it into an official code. This is also why the number 13 disappears. It has nothing to do with the floor's structural integrity and everything to do with a different kind of fear. Hotel and office developers, going back over a century, found something specific and consistent. Tenants did not want to rent the 13th floor, buyers did not want to purchase it, and guests asked to be moved off of it. Not in one country. In dozens, independently, across cultures that otherwise share almost nothing else in common. So, building after building simply skip the number on the panel, even while every floor still physically exists, still has the same square footage, still requires the same number of structural beams. The 13th floor is there. It is just never named, because an unnamed fear, multiplied across 1 million buildings, is cheaper to accommodate than to fight. So the panel in front of you, the one you have never once looked at closely, is not a button layout. It is 100 years of trial and error performed by strangers who never spoke to each other, solving the same 4 problems over and over. A body that varies, an eye that needs less than a second, a hand that might be shaking, and a fear that has nothing to do with physics. Nobody coordinated this. Nobody had to. The same problem, asked enough times, in enough countries, by enough engineers who had no contact with one another, eventually stops producing different answers. It starts producing the same one. That is what you are actually touching every single time you press that button. Not a company's design choice. Not a government regulation. The accumulated, independent, repeated discovery of what a frightened human body actually needs, arrived at by people on opposite sides of the planet who were never in the same room. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, the everyday object that turns out to be 100 years of invisible engineering, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what floor your apartment building skips. There is one more detail worth sitting with because it ties all of this together. Most of the engineers who established these standards, the button height, the icon shape, the braille placement, never met each other. Many of them worked decades apart. Some of the earliest accessibility research on button reach came out of post-war rehabilitation studies for injured veterans, long before any law required it. The companies that adopted those findings did it quietly, building by building, without a press release, because it solved a real problem and the alternative kept failing in the same predictable way. That is the part that makes an elevator panel different from almost every other object you touch in a day. A doorknob does not need to account for a panic attack. A light switch does not need to work for 3 incompatible bodies at once. A vending machine button does not need to be legible through smoke. The elevator panel does all of it, quietly, every single day, in a box you spend less than a minute inside. You will probably press one again today. Look at it for half a second longer than usual. Notice the height. Notice the icons. Notice whether your building has a 13th floor. Most people never do.